I thought, why am I, the CTO of a 3-person startup, in the position of having to create things that are pretty basic, like a socket library? I never want another .NET developer to regret picking .NET to build something important. So the first time I tried to use open source was, I think this must have been like 2008, 2009. I started using, I think, blogengine.net, and I contributed a plugin for it on CodePlex. I think it was for adding footnotes to make citations in some of the posts I was doing. So that was like the very first time I had ever had to look through the source code of another project before. And then I set up my own little CodePlex repository. And I think I was using Mercurial back then. I hadn't had any exposure to Git or GitHub or anything like that. Akka.net was probably the biggest open source project that I've been heavily involved with for a long time. I've been working on Akka.net in some way, shape, or form since November of 2013. We needed the ability to do real-time stream processing. It took me forever to figure out that's what I needed, because I had never worked with anything like that before. But when I started looking at it, it seemed like actors, which is a computing concept that goes all the way back to the early 1970s, were the right tool for the job. And so I read about Erlang, and then I discovered Akka, which is originally written in Scala. And then I figured, well, the actor model's been around for, 40 years. Surely something like this exists in .NET. And this is back in 2013, mind you. And the answer was there was a bunch of abandoned Microsoft research projects, and that was about it. So I briefly contemplated having us rewrite a major portion of our analytics system in Java, so we could work with the Akka framework there. But I came to the conclusion that, everyone on my team has a lot of experience knowing how to run large scale .NET applications, but no one had any experience managing Java applications other than some big data tools that we use like Apache Cassandra and Hadoop, that sort of thing. So we ultimately decided the lesser of two evils was to port the thing we didn't know, which was Akka and actor programming, to port that to the runtime that we did know, which was .NET. And as it turned out, there were other people who were working on doing the exact same thing right around the same time we started doing it. So we all joined forces, and by, I guess I would say kind of around February 2014, we released our first NuGet package onto NuGet. We went live into production with our product that used it about 3 months later. And we had to fix all sorts of bugs that we found inside the networking layer. We started attracting more and more people. I had people start hitting me up for consulting around Akka.net. After I sort of published the blog post announcing that our company was dead and I was out of a job, I had a bunch of people hit me up on LinkedIn asking for help using Akka.net for building all sorts of things. And so we had a bunch of other customers spread out all over the world who were interested in using Akka.net. And we ended up deciding, you know what, maybe we can make a business out of this. And that's sort of how I ended up starting my company, Petabridge, which is all about helping businesses that want to build high scale applications on top of Akka.net be successful, trying to do the same sorts of things we were doing with our startup, learning how to build those types of architectures, how to do deployments, how to test, that type of thing. So the primary funding source for Akka.net, it's either been my first startup funded my own labor and the labor of one of my other employees who helped co-author some of it. And then Petabridge, which has been in business since January 2015, we've been self-funded. We originally sort of self-funded the company by selling online trainings for learning how to do Akka.net architecture, remoting, and clustering. Clustering is how you build a really highly available application with Akka.net. And so we started teaching these online courses. Eventually that led to doing group trainings for businesses. We also started making some money doing architecture reviews and consulting. Later, we added support plans. And then a couple of years ago, we started selling performance monitoring products for being able to monitor how well your Akka.net application is working at scale. We've taken a lot of the money that we earned from doing all those things, and we've reinvested it back into Akka.net, either in the form of hiring contractors to go ahead and do work directly on the source code. For instance, some of the other contributors who worked on the project for years, I would turn around and say to them, hey, I've got a project that's very labor intensive, but I don't have the time to do it. If I gave you, let's say, a few $1,000s, do you think you'd be able to go ahead and do this over the course of the next 3 weeks? And they'd say, well, sure, great. They could go ahead and make a little bit of money on the side. These developers all had full-time jobs too. So we kind of started doing small stuff like that. Now Petabridge has 2 full-time employees in addition to me who work on Akka.net, or they work on some of the other plugins that are built on top of it, such as like some of our persistence plugins. They do that, 5 days a week. And we're looking at trying to hire some more people for working on things like our documentation and tutorials. That's sort of another area that we're looking at, trying to get a full-time resource for doing that. The open source business model is built on this kind of value plus model, where the idea is that you should give away 80% of what you make for free. That's sort of the core open source technology that businesses are going to invest a lot of time into. And having that technology be free is actually a big competitive advantage. It means that developers can start trying it out and working with it without having to talk to someone in the procurement department. Most of your paying customers are going to be big corporations that want to comply with licenses. They want training. They want to know this technology is really going to work, because they're going to end up writing an application that generates tens of millions of dollars to billions of dollars revenue a year on top of it, depending on what the application is being used for. But either way, it's important enough that it works right, that they're willing to spend the money to find out. Your business model is not typically going to generate much money from students, startups, and other people who wouldn't ever use your software if it wasn't free. Those people are probably not going to be your paying customers, but they might be your evangelists. They might be some of the people who turn around and tell their friend who works for a big bank or a health insurance company, hey, check out this really cool framework I was able to use to solve this concurrent programming problem I had. Or I was able to use it for a homegrown IoT application I wrote for fun. That's sort of some of the trade-offs there. But the way you really make money as an open source business is you need to find a way to sell things in addition to what your open source technology does. So for instance, with our Phobos product, we sell these performance monitoring instrumentation capabilities that you don't get in the built-in sort of framework. So there's this sort of open core, which is what you use to build your application. But once you start worrying about production concerns like performance monitoring, then you might want to spend a few $1,000s a year buying a license for your company to use this across all of your applications that are built on top of it. Has it been difficult to find contributors outside of like my paid employees? It's a challenge with every open source project. We've had a core development team on Akka.net that's stuck around for years. But people change jobs and move on to other things. And ultimately that sort of volunteer contribution effort is only lasts as long as that person is as invested in the outcomes they're going to get from Akka.net or any open source project really. So we get contributions from people who are just starting to go through the documentation and find typos, and they want to go ahead and send little fixes to them because it makes them feel good. And so we get I call those drive-by contributions. We get those periodically from contributors who maybe contribute 1 or 2 things. We also have a handful of people who are really using Akka.net heavily at work. And when they find bugs or performance issues that really affect their business, their employer is more than happy to let them spend, tens of hours going through and finding pretty nuanced bugs or performance optimizations inside Akka.net. And we have a few of those who've been contributing to Akka.net for like 4 or 5 years, where they've been in the same role at the same company using the same technologies. We also have a couple of evangelists who are people who contribute to the project and have contributed to the project and successfully evangelized Akka.net at like multiple employers they've had over the years, where they start off at this one company, get Akka.net, build an application on top of it, then they change jobs maybe 2 or 3 years later, then they do it again, and they keep showing up with the same GitHub usernames, even though the organization they belong to is different. So you get a lot of that. Ultimately, open source contribution is driven by people's incentives, just like any other human activity. And if your incentive is, you want the gratification of learning and contributing to a project that you feel like is well run and reflects some of your, let's say, aesthetic values as a developer, you might want to go ahead and contribute just as a sort of a learning and growth exercise. But I find that the contributors who tend to stick around are usually the ones who have skin in the game, where their job performance is dependent on Akka.NET's performance. And those are the people who tend to solve the really nasty bugs or port the really big features, or they find the big performance optimizations.